Hey guys, CFI-Andrew here. Just want to give another video on pre-flight assessment of the aircraft. This is specific to the 100-hour and annual inspection requirements. And the reference material we are using is the Airplane Flying Handbook FAA-H-8083-3 Bravo Chapter 2. And you can purchase this book on our website through Amazon. And we do appreciate you using the links, as this does give us a little bit of revenue that helps us support creating these videos. Pre-flight action. So we do our walk around. You're going to do that with your CFI, and that's very model specific. So you're going to use a checklist and learn to pre-flight the airplane, checking the tires and the oil and the propeller and all those kind of things. But there's another section to the airworthiness of the airplane, and that's actually checking the paperwork. So you're going to look for the airplane to be airworthy, and that means that it meets the regulatory airworthiness requirements or the airplane type design and is in a condition for safe operation. So to do the regulatory section, we kind of need to go look at the logbooks of the airplane as well as the paperwork that's inside the aircraft, like your ARROW documents, for example. But looking through the maintenance manuals, ensuring that the airworthiness directives or ADs have been complied with. You've got a current 100-hour and annual inspection, and this video is specific to the 100-hour and annual. 100-hour and annual, when do they due? It is just as easy as it sounds. According to 91409A, the annual inspection is due within the preceding 12 calendar months. That's something you'll see fairly regularly in the regs, is 12 calendar months. And that means if I do it on the 5th of April, it's due by the end of April next year. So you might get a little bit extra time in there. It's not 365 days. It is 12 calendar months. The 100-hour is due under 91409B, and that's only required if the aircraft is operated for hire, like in a flight school type organization where you're going to rent the airplane. But there is 100-hour maintenance due on the airplane just for continued airworthiness. So even if you own the airplane, that 100-hour maintenance is going to occur. You might as well do the 100-hour inspection because the aircraft's going to be opened up for things like lubricating the flaps and all that kind of stuff. So if the airplane's opened up, go ahead and do the 100-hour inspection anyway. It's easier to catch things on the ground. It's very comprehensive pre-flight, if you will, performed by a mechanic. So I do recommend doing the 100 hours anyway. If you're flying less than 200 hours a year in your own airplane, which is quite common, say you get to 150 hours, you're just going to go ahead and do that 100-hour as an annual, because you're going to reach that in 7, 8, 9 months. Go ahead and do the annual instead of doing 100-hour, and then you're good for another 12 months. If you're flying more than 200 hours a year, then that middle maintenance could be just a 100-hour inspection. But the annual is due every 12 calendar months. The 100-hour is due every 100 hours. So what's the difference between a 100-hour and an annual inspection? One of my favorite questions on a flight review or oral prep, and students into that testing situation will try to create a better answer. The answer is really simple. It's the exact same inspection. The only difference is who can actually perform the inspection. An annual has to be done by a mechanic holding airframe, power plant, and inspection authorization. To get that IA or inspection authorization, you have to have been a mechanic holding both airframe and power plant for at least 3 years. You go interview with the FAA. You take an additional written test. You have the FAA assign you a principal maintenance inspector. You do continuing education every 12 months. You renew every 2 years. So there's just more FAA oversight, and that's the kind of mechanic we want to look at the airplane on at least an annual basis. However, the 100-hour can be done by an AMP, mechanic holding airframe and power plant. The airframe could be done by a mechanic holding only airframe, and the power plant could be done by a mechanic holding only a power plant rating. So that can be done in that interim maintenance at those 100-hour intervals. So in a typical maintenance shop, you might have 1 or 2 IAs and a handful of AMPs. Those AMPs can do the 100 hours. The senior IA mechanics are going to do the annual inspections. But the only difference between a 100-hour and an annual is who actually performs the inspection portion of that. You're going to do maintenance during the same time, right? Oil changes, spark plugs, all that kind of stuff. But that can be done by a mechanic. The inspection needs the inspector's eyeballs on what they're signing off as inspected as airworthy. And for the annual, that's going to be done by somebody holding an IA. So what is a 100-hour annual inspection? It's defined in 14 CFR 43, which is kind of the maintenance type section of the regs. Under Appendix D, there's a checklist in there of the minimum items that you're going to find in an annual or 100-hour. And typically in the logbook entry, you'll see in accordance with 43 Appendix D and whatever else maintenance instructions for the aircraft. So 43 Appendix D plus any additional items that the manufacturer says they need to be. The mechanic has to use a checklist on these inspections. So the checklist will be printed out, written down, however they format they choose. And during the inspection, they'll go through and actually check all the items on that checklist. And then at the end, they will produce a label or write in the logbook. Typically, most mechanics use printed labels and a signature that they actually have to pen in there, called a wet signature. And then they'll apply that label into the aircraft logbooks. So they're going to go through and check all the airworthiness directives. These are kind of like recalls on the aircraft. So when the aircraft is manufactured and then some defect or special recurring maintenance item is discovered during the operation of the aircraft, the FAA will issue an airworthiness directive. They become mandatory, and they will go through and check all these ADs. There'll be an AD log in the maintenance logbook entry saying, here's the AD number, it was issued this date, here's a brief description, it was checked on this date or time period, hours on the airplane, and it was a one-time or it was a recurring inspection. So a good example of a recurring inspection is a lot of the heaters, the welds have to be inspected to ensure that they're not cracking and allowing carbon monoxide into the cabin. So they will do that every 25 or every 50 hours. That's going to be required maintenance of those time periods. A one-time AD may be, hey, we discovered, after these aircraft were in the field, that something was slightly miswired. There was an AD on a series of Cessnas where the ground power plug was actually wired to the wrong side of the starter solenoid. So when you plugged in ground power, the propeller would turn. So this only happened on a few airplanes, but the AD came out and said, hey, just check that this wire is on the correct side of the starter solenoid. Once it was done one time, signed off, never needed to be done again. And it was just checking that manufacturing defect. So those will be checked. You might also have service bulletins. These are things that the manufacturer has found that they want checked. A lot of organizations must do service bulletins, but if you're a Part 91 operator, it's recommended. These are the things the manufacturer said, hey, go ahead and check this. It may end up being an airworthiness directive later, and when the AD comes out, it will say you don't need to do this if you already applied with service bulletin, whatever the number was. So a lot of organizations, a lot of owners will go ahead and do the service bulletins because it just preempts needing to do the AD later, especially on the one-time ones. And it's going to include all the maintenance required. So the annual and 100-hour actually inspections. But what would happen is you would sign off the inspection, say the aircraft has been found unairworthy, a list of defects has been provided to the owner. In reality, what happens is the mechanic will go through, do all the 100-hour type maintenance on the aircraft, right? Those are hour-based, not yearly-based, but all 100-hour inspection. There might be a 500-hour inspection on, say, the magnetos. They're going to do an oil change, clean the spark plugs. If there is some time period recurring every 6 months, every 12 months, every 5 years, they're going to go ahead and do the ones required. And then they'll do the inspection, they'll correct any defects, and then they'll sign off the aircraft as airworthy. So you're going to find one logbook entry for that entire maintenance cycle and inspection resulting in an airworthy aircraft. Very few times would you have a mechanic do an inspection, sign it off on airworthy, and then take it to a different mechanic to correct, and then have that signature on the correction basically authorize the annual as now being airworthy. It's all going to be done one time, one entry, maintenance plus inspection. 99.9% of the time, that's how you'll find it in the logbook. Okay, so you take a trip, and during the trip you find out that you're at 99.5 hours and there's a 100-hour inspection due. Or you fly somewhere on the 30th, and a week later you want to come home and you will go, uh-oh, I'm out of annual. What can you do? Well, obviously you can have the maintenance done wherever it is that you are. You can take it to a repair station, maintenance shop, mechanic, have it done. But that's going to be somebody maybe you're not familiar with. Maybe the flight school wants to do all the maintenance in-house. The 100-hour, you can actually overfly by up to 10 hours to return it to the maintenance base. That doesn't mean you can dispatch the airplane with 100.1 hours and say, well, we've got 10 hours, we can overfly the 100-hour. That 10 hours is to get the airplane back to its maintenance base. And that anytime you use of that 10 hours is deducted from the next 100-hour inspection. So for example, I'm at 100 hours, I fly the aircraft home, it's now got 105 hours on the airplane, the inspection is done, signed off. The next 100 hours actually doing 95 hours, the 100 minus the 5 hours I used to get it back. They do that so people don't say, well, it's a 110-hour inspection. It's a 100-hour inspection, needs to occur every 100 hours. If I choose slightly into the next one, 3, 4, 5, 6, 9 hours, then I can still do that, but I have to deduct that time from the next 100-hour inspection due. Annuals, if it was due on the 31st and it's now the 1st, the aircraft is unairworthy and I can't overfly an annual. I also cannot overfly any airworthiness directives. And remember, a lot of these are due at 50 hours and 100 hours. So, and some even at 25 hours. So if the AD is due, I can't burn into that 10 hours of 100-hour inspection to get the airplane home because the AD is now due and the airplane has to be on the ground and that inspection or maintenance item has to be conducted before I can fly the airplane again. So ADs are often the limiting factor that actually prevent the use of that 10-hour buffer unless, you know, they do a couple of those, say they do it at 40 hours and they do it at 75 hours. And then obviously I can fly into the 110 to get the airplane home. But what happens if I am out? The airplane is somewhere, I need to get it back to the maintenance base, it's out of annual, there's an AD due, something along those lines. What you can do is actually have your mechanic contact the Flight Standards District Office. They will issue what's called a special flight permit. Everyone calls it a ferry permit. The technical term is special flight permit. And they will say this aircraft may fly from point A to point B during the day, good weather, VFR, only require crew members for the purpose of, and it will be getting it back for maintenance. That means if you're out there with your family, they're taking the airlines back, you're flying the airplane back alone because it's a single pilot airplane. For example, 2-pilot airplane, you can have the 2 pilots on board, but no passengers. And it can only be flown at day and it can only be flown in visual meteorological conditions. So, and they also put a provision in there, don't overfly, you know, large crowds of people and populated areas. So it really is a relocation flight for maintenance. Called a special flight permit, ferry permit, a lot of people call it, goes in the permanent maintenance records of the aircraft. You can then move that aircraft back to get the maintenance done. Some mechanic's going to have to look over the airplane to sign off on it and say, yep, special flight permit was issued. I believe the airplane is airworthy for this trip. And then you go ahead and fly the trip back for the maintenance and get that done. So obviously, as a pilot, this is the kind of knowledge that you need to have. But one time that you might actually be quizzed on this or asked by the FA or somebody else or a flight instructor is during a flight review. It's just one of those questions. Hey, prove to me that this airplane is airworthy. And they go, the student says, you know, here's the 100-hour, here's the annual. And you go, what's the difference? And you should just be able to say, there is no difference. An IA has to sign the annual, an AMP can sign a 100-hour. That's the end of that question. You don't have to get creative. It's same inspection again. So you might have that. You might get ramp checked. So the FAA is just going to walk out to you on the ramp and say, hey, prove to me this airplane's airworthy. They're going to look for things like your weight and balances in the airplane, the registration, the airworthiness, operator's handbook, the placards are there, required equipment is there. And they might say, hey, show me the logbooks and where's your last annual or 100-hour. And they do have the right to say, what's the difference between these two, and kind of quiz you for your knowledge. And of course, during any sort of oral exam, you go for your private pilot certificate, instrument, commercial, and so on. You're going to have those logbooks out. You're going to be pointing them out. And one of the favorite questions is, what's the difference between the two? What do they include? What about the overflight with the 10 hours? Can you overfly an annual? The answer is no, unless you have a special flight permit to get the airplane back for maintenance. So those type of oral questions, and you should feel confident enough to just answer, same inspection, annuals and IA, 100 hours AMP. I can overfly by up to 10 hours, but that requires me to deduct that from the next one. I cannot overfly airworthiness directives, and I cannot overfly the annual inspection. If the aircraft's stuck somewhere, there is a way to get it home called a special flight permit, but it's not something that you really should be using, but it is a method to get the aircraft home. So those kind of questions, who can ask, what they are, what they include. If you know 43 Appendix D is the basic checklist, even better. And then if you are going for an oral test, what you want to do is make sure the day before your oral, or a week before your oral, or a month before your oral, not the morning of, which is what very often happens. Get with a mechanic in the flight school, maybe with your instructor also, but at least with a mechanic, and go, hey, can you go through the logbooks with me and show me the 100-hour and annual and how you guys sign off on it and why it's written the way it is. A lot of places will do the annual on the aircraft in the airframe logbook, and then the propeller and engine will just say 100-hour maintenance because the aircraft logbook has signed off the annual for all three. The other two are just going to be the maintenance entries for the engine and the propeller. Some will do an annual inspection on the airframe, annual inspection on the engine, annual inspection on the propeller. But you want to know how your flight school does that, how to find them. At the same time, go ahead and have them show you the 91207D ELT inspections, your pitot-static transponder, 91, 411, and 413. So find all those things. Spend some time with a mechanic. They're more than happy to spend time with pilots that want to understand the maintenance of the aircraft and how things work. Go out to the hangar when the cowling's off, ask them to show you the magnetos, understand what's going on in that aircraft with the systems. But just ask your mechanic, hey, can you show me the logbooks? Because they're going to know that better than just about anyone. They're dealing with that and the paperwork and the regulatory airworthiness of the aircraft on a regular basis. Good resource for you to use as a pilot. Thanks for watching. I try to keep these videos short, just on one subject at a time, kind of that 5 to 15 minutes, so you can do a quick overview of something that you might just need some additional knowledge on. You might need a refresher. You might be going for your flight review or an oral test. We try to fill that gap between the written test prep and the flight portion that you're learning from your instructor. Very useful for the oral exam and just better understanding some of the things between that written knowledge and the flight knowledge. It's that additional aviation knowledge that you need. So we try to keep the videos short, but appreciate them. Please like and subscribe. We're going to produce at least one of these a week, hopefully more. And you can find the complete course selection at CFI-Andrew.com. Those link back to YouTube. And we do have some basic pilot supplies on there. Again, we appreciate you buying through that because we do make a small affiliate percentage on the sales through Amazon, and that helps provide the resources we need to produce these videos. Thanks, safe flying, and I hope you enjoy the videos.